We talked about the short term. Are there other red flags? Because we do have a lot of investors here. Are there other red flags you see when you're valuing this? I mean, one that comes to mind to me is uniqueness, or if in fact you're one of many.
Yeah. Yeah, so we actually don't mind investing in a competitive field. To a certain extent, it's a validation of the market, right? Yeah. But the key is to find the best team in the field. I mean, Google is a good example. We're not a good investor in Google, but they were probably in a highly competitive search engine field when they got started, but it was a good team, good technology.
View is that they invented search or something, obviously.
Right, but obviously,
there were other.
Right, Lycos, Excite, the list goes on, right? But so you don't have to be the first to the party, but you certainly have to be unique enough and to sort of have that staying power.
And one of the things, again, that was discussed a bit in the last session, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
By the way, that was an awesome talk, right? I mean,
Eureka.
Yeah.
Cryptocurrency is the name of the game right now, financial area, but there are other opportunities, and I think I saw something on one of your talks where you even mentioned groceries or food business. What are the other opportunities in blockchain? It's
pervasive. I think blockchain is so fundamental that it's the second coming of internet, right? I often refer this to as a internet square. And the fundamental driver is this: if you look at the computational power in the x-axis, and then the bandwidth in the y-axis, yep. Right? So blockchain is basically that z-axis. As computational power increases and the bandwidth increases to everyday consumer, every one of us have a phone in our pockets, right? And these things, where's my phone? Very important, it's like my brain, right? These things become servers, right? This is no different from a server in the bank. So we have all these servers floating around at $500, actually some of these phones are free. So it changes everything, right? So it really, when you think about internet revolution, there's internet 2.0, 3.0, shared economy, all that, mobile internet. Blockchain, I think it's the internet square because it takes that third dimension of combining bandwidth and computational power and put the distributing computing into every one of the consumers. So it affects the way we do finance. That's the low-hanging fruit. Most people think about payment. And you have smart contract. It changes the law profession. It changes the media entertainment industry in terms of profit distribution. It changes the food industry, manufacturing industry. Based on the IoT, you can start tracking the goods, how they were manufactured as a history. It changes everything. So it's very pervasive. It even changed the way you might be governed one day, right? Governance, e-government. So I think it's such a fundamental change in the way we humans communicate with each other. So we're just seeing, going back to the baseball example, this is a spring training of a long baseball season that ends with in a 7-game series World Championship.
And we're
very early.
If you were, I don't know if there is such a thing as Blockchain Magazine, but if there was, and they were doing their end of the year issue for 2018, what would be the feature story or the headline, do you think? How significant is this year in evolution?
I think this year is important because it is the first time I feel the mainstream consumers are getting this awareness, right? And actually started, if you trace back to the Bitcoin price, just using it as a proxy, it was around Thanksgiving time when the Bitcoin price started climbing. And many people attribute it to Thanksgiving dinner. Suddenly, one person come to the turkey dinner, and then they told them about the rich stories about Bitcoin. Everybody go and buy. And we're investors in a lot of exchanges, and our portfolio companies can't keep up with the new account opening, right? And that was the biggest challenge. But it's so quickly you see the Bitcoin price start crashing and correcting in Q1 of this year. So I think this is definitely the blockchain technology getting indirectly introduced to the public through Bitcoin. Most people still don't know what it is, but now they're beginning to get a taste of what it could become.
I meant to mention this earlier. Andy said something very dangerous to me when we met briefly ahead of time, which was he said, to a journalist, feel free to ask me anything. So.
Okay, please.
But I mean, crypto obviously and Bitcoin and blockchain clearly cuts across geographic boundaries. But is the U.S. where it's happening, or what are the hotbeds from that point of view?
Good question. In spring training right now, I think it depends on industries. I think, or depending on the layer of the architecture, I think in the mining space, it's still, China and, China is probably dominant. And then in terms of exchanges, it's moving very quickly. If you see the exchanges, they moved from US to China to now Japan. And some of these governments have very favorable and tolerable policies that would attract these exchanges. So it's moving very quickly. Whatever is sort of the flavor of the day today will probably be very different next year. But one thing I do notice, blockchain compared to other type of early stage startups we invest, blockchain companies are very international. One thing I didn't address is if you look at the major change in startup this year compared to 10 years ago is really the idea of harnessing those two axes, computational power and bandwidth. It allows international startups to collaborate, right? And combine that with open source movement. You look at any white paper, you see this is like a United Nation, and you see oftentimes people don't work from the same office, right? So idea of having great companies coming out of Silicon Valley, it's going to become a little bit sort of spread out a little bit more, yeah. Yeah. I mean, of course, yeah.
Entry point? I mean, what's the cost? It's pretty low.
Right, and you have the best of breed. You could find the best backend developer, you could find the best Solidity programmer, and they may not necessarily be living within 10 square miles of each other, right? In fact, oftentimes they're different nationalities.